Hello, this is Matt Janucki, and you're listening to Inside Men's Mental Health, brought to you by Psych Sessions. Here we explore this thing called masculinity and its impact on men's mental health, relationships, and communities. We'll learn together through conversations with thought leaders, innovators, and industry experts. Our conversations will also help us understand how these experts became interested in men's mental health and the ways their journeys have made them who they are today. In this episode, I spoke with Dr. Jennifer Mootz, Assistant Professor of Clinical Medical Psychology at Columbia University and Research Scientist with the Research Foundation for Mental Hygiene, New York State Psychiatric Institute, and Dr. Palmira Fortunado dos Santos, the Mental Health, Trauma, and Violence Program Coordinator with the National Institute of Health in Mozambique. It was a real privilege to speak with Palmira and Jen about their work implementing an intervention for intimate partner violence in Mozambique. In this episode, we chat about the complex nature of masculinities in Mozambique, why interpersonal counseling can provide benefits to both women and men in relationships in which violence is a reality, and the process their team went through on how to engage men in their intervention. I think you'll really be encouraged by their work. I certainly was. Enjoy. First, just want to say thank you to both of you for taking some time. I know you both have many things to do, both with work and with your families. And just want to thank you for taking the time to have a conversation with me today. I'm just very excited and just feel privileged to learn from your experience today after diving into your work. Just feel just a privilege to learn from the work that you've been doing, and just to maybe get things started a little bit, just interested in how the two of you connected and began to work together. Maybe a little storytelling around that.
That's a great question. Well, thank you so much for having us. We're also thrilled to be here and talk about the work that we're doing. Palmira, do you remember when we first met? I was actually trying to think back and I was like, I can't quite remember the first time that we met.
I really don't, and I've read the reports, the first reports, because I've been working on closing some other things about the work with Pride, and I don't remember when exactly you did jump in. I can't remember if it was here or in New York that we met.
Mm.
I think it was New York
I,
in one of our trips there.
yeah, I do. That's right. I think you're correct about that. And we can talk maybe a little bit about the Pride Project. I don't know if you want to say a few words.
Yeah.
We did.
Uh-huh.
We did have a big meeting in New York, and many people from the Ministry of Health came. Well, you know what? Now I'm actually thinking back, Palmira. I
Yeah.
remember meeting you when you were there with Lydia and Wilsa, and it was just a smaller group who came, and we were in sort of a
The three of
small
us.
room talking about the Pride Project, which we'll explain to you, Matt, in just a second
Okay.
because that's how we got started working together. And then I also remember another trip because it was very cold in New York City. And I remember, Palmyra, you were so cold and you were talking about which coat is better. And we were just focused on keeping her warm for that week because it was an unusually cold
Mm.
week. And of course, for Mozambique, you were just suffering.
This was a funny story, but because we've met on work purposes, and I'm the kind of person that is not good dealing with the cold, and all our trips are always scheduled for the summertime or when it's warmer. But that particular time we needed to go early in the year. That's one of the times Jen came because we were starting doing the half whole part of the project, and we needed to add the digital part of the project.
Mhm.
And it turns that exactly that year, it was end of February, if I'm not wrong, natural phenomena happened. It was called polar turnover.
Mm.
And instead of the winter ends, it came back from the North Pole just for me.
Oh gosh.
And Jen was very helpful, trying to recommend what type of clothes, because I was full of layers and layers of cold clothes. And she told me to try and find thermal
Uh-huh.
clothes. Do you remember that? I totally forgot about that. Now I'm recalling that thermal clothes. And that day I went out and I finally found some thermal under clothes, and it helped a lot.
That's great. It's fun to think back when we first met. This was
Yeah.
probably in 2016, around there,
Okay.
Palmira. And I don't know, do you want to say just a few words about the Pride Project? Because
Yeah, I'd
you're
love to hear what
really
that is.
involved in that.
Yeah. So it was a big project for Mozambique. It was a big deal because we've been struggling a lot with the scarcity of human resources for health in general, but particularly for mental health, it's a struggle. A long time ago, we started implementing a strategy that we call task shifting, by that where we train non-specialists to deliver mental health care, doing diagnostic, prescribing medication, doing therapy, and so on and so on. And it was only at policy strategies, Ministry of Health level. But at some point, we needed to have a better structure, scientific structure of that, bring some more evidence-based interventions. And that partnership with Columbia University helped us do that. A large team from Colombia, led by Milton Weinberg and Maria Oquendo, who is now at UPenn, worked with us building this project. But it was no longer only task shift. It was to integrate mental health in primary health care, because that was our purpose, to make sure that everybody in primary health care, in first entry to the health system, could have access to mental health. And that's when Pride started. Our plan was to make sure that all mental disorders could be very easily assessed, diagnosed, correctly diagnosed, and ensure that the treatment would be evidence-based and in a way that would be easy for these non-specialists.
Yeah.
So we developed this package of interventions that could be used by these providers, with supervision from the specialists that are in each provinces. But right now we are testing. We are in the process of finalizing the testing of this intervention in one of the largest and most populous provinces in the country. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that. Thank you for giving me some background and context for the work that connected the two of you together, and the cold weather too that connected the two of you together initially, and the work that the two of you are doing now is focused on interpersonal violence prevention in Mozambique. And so shift us to that place to talk a little bit around that. And since that's the place that the two of you are connected and working in now, just wondering if y'all could talk a little bit about that, around probably a little bit of what interpersonal violence is. I know that probably could take a long time just to do that, but maybe just what that is, and then maybe just a little bit about the nature of the challenge or the problem in Mozambique.
Well, I'm glad that Palmira gave the introduction of pride, because that's really important contextually for
Mm,
starting this work in intimate partner violence. One of the interventions, so Palmira was mentioning that the ministry wanted things to be evidence-based. They selected interpersonal counseling for common mental disorders. That would be depression, anxiety, and PTSD. And interpersonal counseling is a brief form of interpersonal psychotherapy, which I don't know if you want me to just explain a little bit, but I'll just say the core of it is working on resolving interpersonal problem areas. And within this framework, those are categorized into four domains, which are grief, disputes, loneliness, and life changes or transitions. So within one of those domains, disputes, As the ministry was training, they built up a national cadre of trainers who would then train the primary care providers and community health workers in interpersonal counseling. But to do that, they themselves needed to be trained and supervised in this psychotherapy. And we had some interesting data that when people were presenting with disputes, which is just some kind of disagreement, that a lot of the time, I think over half, something about 60% of those cases were with intimate partners.
Mm.
And along with, disputes and disagreements with intimate partners, often can come violence.
Yeah.
And typically that's defined. We try to be very concrete about it and just talk about it as behaviors. So we have, when we assess for it, we look at different areas of violence. So it could be physical, like pushing someone, slapping, hitting, things like that, or very serious violence would be using a weapon of some sort. There's psychological violence, that would be name calling, and sexual violence. So we try to look at all of those areas and address them within our adaptation of interpersonal counseling for couples.
Just to add, because you said
Yeah. Yeah.
some of the relevant things, the thing is that culturally, intimate partner violence is so part of the people, couples' behavior that in some communities it's not even considered an issue, a problem. It is necessary for it to become very severe, the violence to become really harmful for people to consider present charges or asking for help. And that's one of our main issues here. We have a specific service in the hospital for these cases. We have specific service in the police stations, but still people usually do not complain. If you slap your wife or if a wife slaps the husband, it will not be considered as severe violence. In other countries, it would be reason enough for a divorce or something, or to escalate some more issues. But for here, in some households, it's daily life, And the thing is that the victim in these situations gets depressed, gets anxious, gets suicidal even. And only when things really get bad is when you have the family, the community doing something to help or supporting that victim to seek for professional help. In our project, we took that in account, and the idea is to use the interpersonal therapy not to help the victim, the woman, that is our focus in this study, not only to help the woman, but to help the couple overcome their issues. Okay, the idea is for them to stay together and in a happy relationship. Usually what we find is these women empowerment strategies, like to make the victim to be engaged and speak out and leave the husband and live her own life. But we know for sure that in some situations there are other problems behind that lead to the violence. So if we address the mental disorders and the social problems, if we address the reason of the dispute that the couple is living with this therapy, probably, most certainly, the violence will reduce. Then we will be treating not only the depression of that woman, but also the couple problem. That's why we want to bring the husband in the therapy, so that they can work together and make sure that besides all the cultural understanding of the violence for problem solving, there are other strategies that they can use, other types of support they can rely on to resolve their problems.
And if it's okay, I just wanted to
Yeah,
jump
yeah.
in because there was something that Palmira said that I think is so, so important about the work. And it's really about, working within the cultural context in a way
Mm,
that aligns with, local values. And, this idea of separating, as Palmyra mentioned, this might be, more typical in a Western approach, although I think, some people might disagree with that. But I know when I was first trained as a psychologist and doing couples counseling and couples therapy, we were taught to, if there was any violence present, that we should separate the couple. That was the gold standard of working with couples at that time because the worry behind working with a couple is that you could elevate or escalate the violence
right, right.
if you worked with them. And so in our approach, we're also very careful to work with couples who have what's called situational intimate partner violence, which is like the slapping and the pushing and the things that come out of couple discord that it's much more common for that to be in place than the severe violence, the use of a weapon and other things. So, stalking, things like that might be considered severe. And so those couples are actually screened out, but they're rare. Most couples fall in the situational partner violence category. And from previous work in sub-Saharan Africa, we've also seen that there's a lot of emphasis on family harmony, value of the family, keeping the family together. There's a lot of stigma about separation. There's less infrastructure, for example, for women to separate if they wanted in situations of violence. There might not be shelters. They could be economically dependent on their male partners. So, to work within the context, we really felt it important to work with the family and enhance that harmony the best that we can, making sure to screen carefully for couples who have situational violence as opposed to severe.
Yeah, kind of on that thread, one of the things that I thought was really interesting in some of the things you discussed in your work was in that through that cultural context, you both said that generally in Western high income countries, often the focus is to identify generally the man, the person who is the perpetrator of the violence, and focus on that individual, target him as the person of treatment. And I think you both stated that generally that's an ineffective way to treat the violence. It doesn't seem like it ineffective as in maybe reducing the violence in the long term. Y'all can speak to that. But the way that y'all are focusing on it in treating the couple, like keeping the couple together, is something that can be effective within that cultural context. And it sounds like something that would be, I think, kind of difficult maybe for us to think about. Of even though there's violence, keeping the couple together in a Western context, we would wrestle with a little bit. I was wondering if y'all could talk a little bit about that of men often treating the man as the perpetrator. That's something that we would typically do here, but something that was not the focus of the interpersonal therapy in Mozambique. Maybe y'all could just explore that a little bit.
Sure, I can kind of start by talking about, what's done here and what's not working, and then Palmira, if you want to jump in. Typically, as you mentioned, so a lot of times, first of all, there's the way that men are involved is because they're mandated to treatment, and I can just speak for the US after violence occurs. And the treatment has been use of the Duluth model, which is about, recognizing differences in power and abusing power, but it might be groups of men who are mandated by the courts to attend these treatment groups. And I think there's pretty good evidence now that those are not very effective.
Mm,
And one of a mentor on this project, her name is Sandra Stith, and she developed a couples therapy focused on reducing domestic violence. She did that within the US and has worked all over the world with this couples counseling. But she gives a great example about, what it means just to work with one side of the partnership because it really
yeah.
is a couple dynamic. And in no way are we saying, people are responsible for the victims are responsible for the violence. But a great example that she gives is something like if you work with the man to alone to talk about, how can you diffuse the situation? How can you recognize when you're escalating in terms of anger? What are some things you can do when you're starting to escalate? And maybe the male partner decides, maybe I can leave the house for a bit. So what might happen then in actuality is they have a big argument, and then he sort of disappears, but he disappears for hours and she doesn't really know where he's gone. And, maybe he's out with friends or maybe he went to the bar, and then she's furious. So it's not that they had agreed on, what are we
Yeah.
going to do together when things start to escalate? And there really is a real power in working with the couple to decide how they're going to independently diffuse the situation, how they can both recognize when things are escalated, and then they have an agreed upon. And she calls it a timeout. We kind of call it a time away because Palmira mentioned in Mozambique, it sounds like you're punishing a child if you call it timeout, but just a way to step away from the situation when anger is starting to escalate.
Because we know that this escalation can be really, really harmful. There's another things that we also have included in the intervention, that is the safety plan, so that the woman can use or implement if they cannot control the situation, if they cannot use the strategies agreed in the session. There is also a portion that she can use some strategies to keep herself safe. And this is reviewed every single session when they come. And for us, this is very, very important, mainly considering that sometimes it can escalate very, very quickly from a slap to something more damage that can damage the woman.
So, thinking through with working with couples in Mozambique, one of the things that I'm really curious about is what masculinities look like in men in Mozambique, both through the interviews you've done with stakeholders and just your familiarity with the just with being there and in the place, of course, Palmyra, just what that looks like, what are the masculine norms there that impact what the violence looks like in the couples, what the relationships look like in the couples that uniquely impact your work there. And I'm just curious if you could help us understand that a bit more.
We are working in the north of Mozambique, where the family systems is matrilineal, meaning that it is.
You're cutting out for me just a little bit, Palmira. I don't know for you.
Oh,
You said
Matt, can
literally.
you hear me?
You said literally something, Palmyra. What was that? Could you say that again?
Yes, I was saying that I will start by making some fun about this question, because Nampula province, where we are doing the study, is in the north of the country,
Okay.
and the family system there is matrilineal,
Okay.
meaning that the family name comes from the wife's family.
Okay.
Okay, it's like they are, the woman is the one who is supposed to be not the household head necessarily, but family problems are solved within her family. She's the one who supposedly gets to decide if she stays or if she goes, if she wants to have an extra husband or something like that. This is what culturally we know about. And because of that, many people say, I would love to live in Nampula. So over there, I'll be allowed to have many wives. And they don't care about it because they are the bosses, so they get to choose. But I don't want to get married to any of them, because if I get married, I'll be cheated.
Okay.
Something like that, because it's like the wife is the boss, something like that.
Okay.
But the reality of life is not like that.
Okay.
Uh, because at the end of the day, if it is a couple, the male will be probably the provider. The male will be a person who have the financial resources most of the times. And Nampula happens to be one of the cities with the highest rates of alcohol consumption. Somehow, the place of the men in the community, although it is matrilineal, is still screaming masculinity. I am the man. If you are the wife, and if I have this financial power, somehow I can be doing whatever I want. And when it comes to violence, it is a reality. In the other hand, because it is matrilineal and the name is on a woman's family, in some situation, I'm talking about the general, not our findings as research. Because it's matrilineal, that man in that family, if he feels like he is diminished by his wife or by his wife's family, if he feels like there's a suspicion of another man in that relationship, it can be a reason for violence. That's these two poles are what we know for the reality in these communities. But with our study, because we interviewed people from the community leadership, we interviewed male people, women people, we had different informations about how do men feel, how do they behave, what they think about violence against women. And I will leave Jen to talk a little bit about that. But we need to take in account that Nampula, where we are doing the study, is particularly delicate. It's delicate, it's not a word, complicated because of this family system organization that is matrilineal. For the general country, if we want to talk about Mozambique as a whole, masculinity, the role of the man is still that African thing that the man is the one who has the power, who makes the decisions, who gives the name to the family. If he wants, he can have as many wives he wants. Women cannot complain. And if this man has the economic power, then it's really, really hard for a woman to have a statement. And this is why most of the times they don't complain when there's violence at home. Okay, because they are very, very vulnerable. If they split, which family community don't recommend. Usually they say, no, wedding is really like that. It's part of the wedding. You have to hang on. Okay. They don't split because they are really, really vulnerable because the men have a role that is not, does not help women find their own place and make a statement so that they can protect themselves about it. Over to you, Jen.
Well, I think that's really well said. And this point that you bring up is a really important point. Many parts in sub-Saharan Africa have so many ethnic groups and languages, and that's also true of Mozambique. And that's, we talk about anything culture, like gender norms, we have to consider which ethnic group, which province are we talking about? And Palmira mentioned we're working in the north, where the Makua is the largest ethnic group there, and it is matrilineal. But we were surprised to see around these questions around violence that it looked more patriarchal, more traditional in this sense. And maybe it is, Palmira, as you're saying, that men still tend to be the providers and have more financial power, and maybe that affects potentially the power dynamics within the couple. And then we did also hear some traditional values like this emphasis on strength. And when we talk about counseling or men attending counseling, something that came up quite a bit was, men's concerns about showing these more vulnerable emotions,
Mm.
which might be sadness or fear, and that is really stigmatized. And a lot of, the stakeholders talked about quite at length, something about just taking advice, men sort of receiving advice in the way that they would say it. Like the best translation we have is something like being influenced, men being influenced, and really it is about taking advice or receiving education. So they talked about it in the context of the provider and the man, that sort of power dynamic, and the provider having more information or sort of this one up in terms of education or power, and that situation was complicated for men and one that they might not want to engage with. And there was an example that people gave, and it was sort of an analogy because and I think all over Mozambique, but Palmira, you can say, but definitely in Nampula, they elect neighborhood secretaries. So these are people who are elected, but sort of in charge of the neighborhood or liaise with the
Okay.
government, or they might
Mhm.
organize, community education, awareness activities. And they sort of mention, sometimes it's difficult for men to attend these events, or they might not want to because of this being influenced, being in the
Mm.
position of being one down in terms of education and the way that that was flowing. I don't know, Palmira, if you wanted to comment on anything like that or.
It's exactly that. You just added to what I said, and this is exactly like that. It's all over Mozambique, that part of community organization. And it's true that in some communities you have the community leader as a female, but they also promote the male leadership, no matter how at the family, at the household. And this turns, it makes everything difficult because it's not necessarily to state that it's culturally acceptable for a male to hit the wife. But when it happens, they will never intervene in a way that they will not necessarily condemn, but to bring that male and make him understand that it is totally wrong. Of course, they try to help them make peace and advise for not to repeat the same behavior, but behind somehow it always sounds like okay. Sometimes women need to be treated that way so that they can learn.
Mm.
You know,
Mm.
and this is something that we've been struggling to change all over the country. The Ministry of Family and Women, it's a ministry with a long name, Family, Social Affairs, Women, and, and so on. They have a strategy all towards domestic violence. We recently had a law for that, but the implementation is a challenge because of the cultural beliefs and behaviors. And one of the works that is needed here is really engage and have the commitment of this community leadership. And one of the parts of our project is really to work with them. And we interviewed some of them and we wanted to learn how do they deal with this situation, how do they find things can change for better. And actually, they agreed to be part of the study, and we are working with them even for recruiting the couples that need help. But there is still a lot to do for a change.
Yeah, this is an important part, or not really pivot, but in some ways of the work that we did. So the first part of our project was all qualitative, where we
Okay.
focus group discussions and individual interviews with key stakeholders. And what we learned through that was that there was this sort of inherent social structure of responding to violence, where Usually, if the couple wasn't able to work it out themselves, then they might bring in family members, often men, right? Palmira, am I correct about that? You might be like uncles or other people to give advice and try to help the couple create more harmony and resolve some of that conflict. And if they weren't able to handle it within the family, then they would go to this community leader. So this person is actually extremely important in the flow of how
Mm.
things go for responding to violence. But as Palmira mentioned, there's a lot of bias in the process, and
Yeah.
some of these cultural norms, they may not favor women. And we didn't hear about this in Mozambique, but I have heard in other studies that I've done in Uganda that sometimes, there might be bribing of the male neighborhood leaders and things like that, or the men might know them in some way in a social capacity. So it might be a system that doesn't bring a lot of justice for women. And one of the challenges we've had has been recruiting at the hospital level because we have psychologists who are trained and ready to respond, but they're in outpatient mental health care facilities at two big hospitals in Nampula City. And as Palmira said, people do not go to the hospital unless violence is extremely severe, extremely severe. So we're just getting these cases that are not appropriate for couples counseling. And we've, I think, screened something like around 50 women.
Okay.
And we found that most of those cases are too severe, or there might be a lot of alcohol use in one or both of the partners, which also wouldn't be a great candidate for this kind of counseling until the alcohol use is diminished somewhat. And so we had a few meetings with community leaders and neighborhood secretaries and just asking them, what do you think about this? What are your recommendations for a response? And because the couples go to them first and not the hospital, so we amended our ethics approval and are now starting to recruit through the community secretaries and trying to think about how to do this work in a more community-based way.
I have a question for you. You're thinking about moving forward and next steps that you're doing, in particular with your couples therapy, your couples intervention. Just imagine with any intervention like that, therapeutic intervention, one of the challenges perpetually, and I would imagine that here too, is to engage the men, to bring the men into that, for them to, I think one of you was talking earlier about the perceived kind of vulnerability around something like that, and wondering what your thoughts are on ways to do that, or ways that y'all are thinking about to do it, or methods to bring the men into that space, because you two are talking about how this could really make an impact on the safety of their partners, and have an impact on the community, and wondering what your ideas are on how to bring the men into it, increase the engagement of men. Wondering what your ideas are.
As Jen said, the first part of our study was qualitative. And during those focus groups and interviews, one of the questions that we asked was, how do people think we could engage men and bring them to these consultations? And a few things that came up included that they would hardly be accepting because of not the stigma, because of the legal stuff. Because some of them would be scared that we could call the police. Some of them
Yeah.
would reject, fearing that they would be blamed for hitting. We would take the wife's side. But in the other hand, some people said that it would be important because usually nobody calls the male for these things. And perhaps they also are having some issues in their own lives. And the wife is not that easy. And they both, as a couple, are not being able to find a common ground for better communication, for problem solving, and so on. And what we are going to implement for our study to engagement is a result of this qualitative study of this result of what we heard from these people we interviewed who are living this situation. And first of all, we will invite, we will ask because we are screening, we are enrolling the victim first, the woman, and she will be the one inviting the partner to join, to participate in the consultation. And now that we have this community enrollment as well with the community leadership, they will be also help us doing this invitation and assuring that those male that it is safe for them to come. And the purpose of the intervention is to help the couple, not to blame the male, not to give support to the wife, but to help the couple. And we are really expecting for it to work because usually it's really hard to bring male in these violences, couple violence situations. And our services at the hospital, because we have this service for violence in general and specifically for gender-based violence, they are open to receive all the partners that are willing to come. And because it is at the hospital, we believe that it will be felt as a safe place for them to come.
Yeah. Well, just what I would add is the framing, as Palmira said, of the intervention has been something that we have adapted. So that was a big part of our tailoring of the intervention because we started with the main outcome that we were assessing and evaluating was women's mental health. And that's the way the proposal and the grant was written. But we realized, men's mental health is just as important in this situation. And if they were to come to this couples intervention and we were focusing on women's mental health and, reducing violence, that we felt that the implicit message behind that would be, you're in the wrong. You did something bad. We want to be clear, of course, that violence is not okay. And at the same time, we just want to make sure that the man especially doesn't feel like he's walking into a situation where he's getting bombarded and blamed, because that's not going to be effective and he will not be motivated to participate. And I think no one really would be in that situation. So we added in activities where we really focus on the couple's mental health. We talked about some of these interpersonal domains, the focus of therapy. And at the beginning of the intervention, we also evaluate how things have been for men. So just trying to understand as a couple, what are they both bringing to the situation? What are areas of hurt? What are areas of problems with communication? And how are these areas of hurt affecting the relationship from both sides? So the purpose of the intervention has shifted according to the way that we've tailored it. And then the framing too of how it's advertised, so to speak, from a public health perspective in the community. We call the manual, it's Healthy Families, Happy Families. So, you'll notice there's not a lot of language about violence specifically because of maybe the stigma around that. And we do know that men value family, that is a big part, this harmony, being a provider, those kinds of things are valued. And so the way that we want to promote this therapy is that this is going to help the family thrive. And we've seen there are a lot of economic consequences when violence is present and discord between the couple and consequences for the children. So this is a way really to help to lean into that value of being a good father and a good mother and helping that family thrive.
I appreciate that. That's really interesting for me to learn about that, of what you learned on the ground from different stakeholders. It sounds like shifted the way you frame the intervention, the language around it, how you explain or will explain the intervention to participants, and with one of those primary goals, how do you increase the engagement of those male partners? And so that's really interesting to learn about that. So thanks for sharing that. I love that. I imagine sometimes that can be hard to make those kinds of pivots, make those kinds of changes, mid project, but great to learn about that. Thank you for sharing it.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, I don't know about, I won't speak for Palmyra, but for me, there's been also a change of heart in the way of approaching this because I
Mm,
do. There are lots of different ways to engage men in studies, and we've looked at other kinds of studies that have done that successfully or not, what kinds of challenges people have had in different areas. So one might be, HIV testing, for example. In sub-Saharan Africa, there was a big push to test as couples and engage men in the process. They might be less likely to test for HIV, and that field has had a lot of success from a public health perspective. So we were
mm,
kind of looking to that literature too
yeah.
to just understand, what's working, what can we adopt. We don't need to reinvent things for this. Other people have been thinking about this and what's been successful for them. But for me, I just sort of in reading that literature, I think there was, I can't remember who exactly, but somebody classified the different ways to involve men. And one of those ways was something like utilitarian, a means to an end. And I think to be very transparent and honest, that was sort of the way that the proposal, the application was written. The end, the outcome was women's mental health. We wanted to resolve violence. We knew that the best way to really work on that couple relationship was to do it as a couple, not individually, as is often done. And so men were sort of brought in initially, I think, from my perspective, as a means to an end. But I've really changed heart in how I think about that and, understand them as a full being coming to this situation who carry their own hurts and strengths. And a big part of the dynamic and that now one of our outcomes is also thinking about their mental health and how they're doing in the family and hoping that they can begin to thrive as well. So that's been a shift for me.
Beauty of the implementation science. We don't need to invent the wheel, and respecting the context and knowing the community that we are working with, we really change our hearts and adapt the science to
Mm,
bring the outcomes that will be meaningful for those who will benefit of it. And thinking on the work that we are doing, there's a lot of science around that. But adapting it to our context has been a challenge from the very first day in all senses. And somehow we've learned so much. Even me, I'm here, I've been dealing with my own population community in mental health field, but specifically in intimate partner violence. There is a lot that I've been learning just with this single project. And it's not only meaningful in terms of the science, but in terms of changing lives in the near future, because if we will succeed for sure. When we
yeah.
finish this study, I'm sure that we will be able to leave some recommendations and help the Ministry of Health build something to really help the public health service dealing with these problems.
Yeah, thank you, Palmira. Thank you for sharing that as well. Well, as we come to the end of our time today, I want to be respectful of your time. The two of you, if, for people who might be interested in your work or work in this area around intimate partner violence, any resources, recommendations for places, things, readings that people might check out, recommendations from the two of you?
Well, I mentioned one of our mentors on this project is Sandra Stith,
Yeah.
and she has this book and a lot of resources, and also is just a very generous person. If you were to reach out to her, I'm sure she would be responsive. But she has this book on domestic violence and working with couples that started initially in the US, and she's done some work all over. I would very much recommend that, especially for people who are thinking about safety procedures and how to think through that with couples and working with couples who have violence. So that's more from a psychotherapeutic perspective. And then, there, of course, is the seminal resource from Connolly on masculinities and thinking about intersections of masculinity, which in any context, but especially working, as I mentioned, in these very complex contexts in sub-Saharan Africa with different languages and ethnic groups, and thinking about intersectionality, not making assumptions about what masculinity looks like in a matrilineal context, but thinking or being open to hearing different kinds of things through qualitative research and questions through this intersectional framework, I think is a nice way to go about it.
Great. Thanks, Jen. Palmira, any recommendations from your end? From you?
Really, I just recommend people to start from the basic. And I just recall the interpersonal therapy books that was just released. Jen, you forgot to start from there. Of course, we are talking about intimate partner violence and using IPT, interpersonal therapy, for that. But there is a manual for interpersonal therapy from Myrna Weissman that was just launched with co-author leadership with Jen. And there is a portion from Mozambique in that book as well that talks about a little bit about our big project, the Pride project. And that was really the starting point for all of this that we are doing right now.
That's right. Thanks for the shout out. I've already moved on, but it is available. I would add that it's available as an open access resource for free if people are interested in it. It's called Interpersonal Psychotherapy, A Global Reach, and it has examples from 31 different countries and many different diverse populations within the United States and Canada. And people talk about adapting the therapy, and there are examples in many different contexts of addressing intimate partner violence.
Great. And any final thoughts? Otherwise, well, we can call it a conversation. It's been lovely talking to the two of you today.
It's been really nice. Thank you so much for your thoughtful questions and having us on. Well,
Thank you so much, Matthew, for having us here. I'm particularly really I was excited. I just wanted to be at home. It would be much easier, but I'm definitely happy for this interview. I hope a lot of people listen to it because it's a very important work in my view, and can be easily adapted to be done in other places that are also needing this kind of intervention. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, Palmira, even though you're hoping to be at home, thank you for doing this today. I really appreciate it, and I hope the two of you have a good rest of your day today.
Thank you, Matt.
Okay, bye, y'all.
Bye.
Hi, everyone. This is Matt, just dropping in to say thanks for taking the time to listen to this episode of Inside Men's Mental Health. Do you have ideas for future episodes or feedback on current episodes? Please feel free to reach out to me at inside.mensmentalhealth@gmail.com. That's inside.mensmentalhealth@gmail.com. inside.mensmentalhealth@gmail.com. Take care, and again, thanks so much for listening.